In this paper, I study the effect of monetary policy on the probability that firms don't pay back their loans. What I argue in this paper is that when you have a monetary expansion, which means a reduction in the policy rate, then the probability that firms don't pay back their loans increases. Now, the intuition that the paper isolates is the following. When you have a monetary expansion, the cost of debt decreases. This means that you have a higher incentive to take debt. Now, if this leads to an increase in the leverage ratio, then your default probability probably increases. And intuition is that your net worth, so the money that the entrepreneur is putting himself, is providing a smaller buffer to the risky loan. Now, I think the reason why this paper is of interest is because it isolates an intuition that is kind of counterintuitive, let's say. So it's kind of against what most of the people would expect, because people usually, at least the existing literature, would probably argue that monetary expansion decreases the default probability. First of all, because debt becomes cheaper, so it's easy to pay back. And second, because aggregate demand shifts out through an increase in aggregate consumption, aggregate investment, something like this, which means that entrepreneurs are richer and it's probably easier to pay back your debt. Instead, what I'm saying is that this intuition perfectly makes sense, and I'm confident that it's how it holds in the data, but probably this is not the end of the story, and it could be that this leverage effect has a role. So in terms of the more technicalities, the first part of the paper is empirical. I use an empirical strategy by Basil, Ferner, and Kimba in the AAR paper in 2005, and I applied to monetary policy shocks. And this first part of the paper shows some evidence that actually the delinquency rate of firms, which is the rate of defaulting loans on the stock of outstanding loans, increases when you have a monetary expansion. The exact timing and the size of the effect kind of depends on certain technicalities which are available in the paper, but overall the result seems robust. And then I move to the second part of the empirical paper, on the empirical exercise, which shows that actually the leverage ratio increases following a monetary expansion, which is kind of encouraging, let's say, in terms of the whole picture of the paper. And then I move to a small theoretical model, which isolates intuition of the paper, this intuition of leverage. That model is already part of the literature, so the contribution is not theoretical. What I'm saying is that most of the literature has not commented this effect. Now, I think this was the case because at that time, meaning in the 70s and the 80s, when this paper, which is the cost stabilification model, was produced, then people would not have believed that a monetary expansion could increase defaults. So I personally think that they consider it just as a weakness of the model. And all models are weaknesses, they would just consider this as a failure of the model, while all the rest is of interest. What I'm saying is that after the crisis, there is an emerging literature that is arguing that this sort of challenge could actually be in place.